There is nothing phonier than a black tie charity gala. It really kills me the way these people sip $1,000 champagne and pretend to care about tragedy when all they really want is a tax write-off. I am Sophia Dennis, and I am the invisible ghost at this party. My parents are on that stage acting like grieving saints to raise millions. But 14 years ago, they let my sister die just to save their reputation. It is the kind of deep-seated hypocrisy that rots you from the inside out. Before I tear their world apart, like share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Now the house lights dimmed and the camera began to roll. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel smelled of stargazer lilies and expensive deception. From where I stood tucked into the shadows of a velvet-draped pillar, the scent was cloying almost enough to mask the metallic tang of chilled champagne and the dusty heat of stage lights. I shifted the weight of the Steadicam on my shoulder, the harness digging into the trapezius muscle I'd spent years strengthening for moments exactly like this. To the 300 guests filling the room, I was nothing more than a piece of furniture, a nameless, faceless operator clad in generic production blacks, my face obscured by the bulk of a $40,000 camera rig. I was part of the machinery of the night as essential, and ignored as the waiters silently refilling flutes of Dom Perignon. Through the viewfinder, the world was crisp, high definition, and saturated in gold. I adjusted the focus ring, pulling the image sharp on the center stage. There they were, Marcus and Eleanor Dennis, my parents. Even magnified through the lens, they looked impeccable. Marcus, in a bespoke tuxedo that hid the softening of his waistline, wore the practiced solemnity of a statesman. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, shimmering under the spotlights. Beside him, Eleanor was a vision of tragic grace in midnight blue silk diamonds glittering at her throat. Diamonds bought with blood money, though no one in this room knew that yet. They were holding hands, a gesture that read as supportive solidarity to the donors in the room. But through my zoomed-in lens, I saw the tension in Marcus's knuckles. He was squeezing too hard. They were performing. They were always performing. 10 years? Marcus's voice boomed through the high-end sound system, rich and baritone vibrating in the floorboards beneath my boots. 10 years since our beloved Chloe left this earth. 10 years of turning our grief into hope. The Angel Foundation exists because our daughter was a fighter. She battled a darkness inside her that no doctor could diagnose until it was too late. And tonight, we ask you to help us ensure no other family has to endure that silence. I fought the urge to vomit. My grip on the camera handle tightened until my gloves creaked. The narrative was polished to a mirror shine. It was a story they had told so many times that I sometimes wondered if they had actually started to believe it themselves. The mysterious illness, the silent battle, the heroic end. It was a masterpiece of fiction crafted to solicit seven-figure checks from guilt-ridden socialites and corporate philanthropists looking for a tax write-off. The truth was far less poetic. The truth was something I carried like a jagged stone in my gut, a weight that hadn't lightened in 14 years. Chloe didn't have a mysterious illness. She had appendicitis. It started as a stomach ache during breakfast and escalated into agony by mid-afternoon. I was 15 then, and Chloe was 18. I remembered the way she had curled into a fetal position on the Persian rug in the hallway, sweat matting her blonde hair to her forehead. I remembered begging my mother to call 911. But that night, wasn't just any night. That was the night Senator Reynolds was coming for a private dinner, a dinner that Marcus had spent 6 months orchestrating. It was the linchpin for his real estate rezoning deal, the night that would secure the family fortune for the next generation. "We cannot have sirens wailing in the driveway, Sophia." My father had hissed at me, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "It looks low class. It signals chaos. Do you want to ruin this family? She has the flu. She's being dramatic." They locked her in her room. They literally turned the key. When the senator arrived, Eleanor turned up the classical music on the stereo system, downstairs Vivaldi, I think it was, to drown out the thumping from the ceiling. They sat there drinking a 1982 Bordeaux, laughing at the senator's dry jokes, eating roasted duck, while their daughter's appendix burst upstairs. They chose the ambiance of a dinner party over the life of their child. They gambled that she would survive the night so they could drive her to a private clinic in the morning quietly, without the flashing lights of an ambulance to disturb the neighbors or the senator. They lost the gamble. Chloe died of septic shock alone in the dark, calling out for a mother who was too busy charmed by political power to answer. When they found her the next morning, the grief wasn't what hit them first. It was the fear of exposure. I screamed. I told them I would call the police, the coroner, the newspapers. I told them they were murderers. That was when the narrative shifted. I became the unstable sister, the one who cracked under the pressure of grief. Within 48 hours of Chloe's body being removed, they had me packed in a car, shipped off to a therapeutic boarding school in Utah. That was little more than a holding cell for inconvenient children. They controlled the narrative. They controlled the money. They controlled the truth. But they didn't control the future. I zoomed out slowly, panning the camera across the crowd to get the reaction shots the director in the control truck was barking for in my headset. "Give me tears, camera 2. Find me a crying blonde in the third row." "Good. Hold that." I held the shot. A woman in emerald satin dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, moved by Marcus's lies. It was repulsive. It was perfect. I had spent the last decade becoming someone else. I changed my last name. I changed my hair. I aged. But mostly, I learned the trade. I became one of the best documentary cinematographers on the East Coast. When the network won the contract to broadcast the 10th annual Angel Foundation Gala live to a national audience, I didn't just apply for the gig. I engineered it. I pulled every favor, worked every contact, and ensured that I was the lead steady cam operator for the event. My parents didn't recognize me. Why would they? To them, Sophia Dennis was a broken, mentally ill drug addict they had successfully estranged years ago. They didn't see people like me, the workers, the crew, the help. We were invisible. We were just tools to make them look good. And that was their fatal mistake, because the camera sees everything. "Okay, camera 2 moved to position B." The director's voice crackled in my ear. "We're coming up on the memorial reel. This is the big moneymaker. I need a steady push-in on the screen when it starts." "Copy that," I whispered into my comms mic. I moved with the fluid grace of a predator, stepping softly over the taped-down cables, navigating the narrow aisle between the tables. I wasn't just here to film. I was here to edit the final cut of their lives. I reached the designated spot near the tech booth. This was the nerve center of the broadcast, a walled-off section of monitors, soundboards, and playback decks. The air here was hotter, buzzing with the hum of servers and cooling fans. I glanced over the low partition. There it was, the playback technician, a bored-looking kid named Gary, who I'd brought coffee to earlier, was queuing up a file labeled Angel Gala Memorial Final.move. This was the centerpiece, the inciting incident of my revenge. In 5 minutes, Marcus and Eleanor would gesture to the massive projection screen behind them. They would ask the donors to look into the eyes of their fallen angel. They would ask for the $5 million legacy donations. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythmic thudding that felt loud enough to be picked up by the boom mics. This was the moment of no return. Once I made my move, there was no going back to the shadows. There was no more hiding. I looked at my parents on stage one last time. Eleanor was wiping a delicate dry tear from her cheek, basking in the sympathy of the room. She looked so safe. She looked so untouchable. She had no idea that the daughter she discarded was standing 20 feet away, about to burn her world to the ground, using the very technology she hired to glorify herself. I adjusted my grip on the camera. The time for mourning was over. The time for the truth had finally arrived. If you're listening to this, maybe you know what it's like to be the one who carries the secrets. Maybe you've been the black sheep, the outcast, or the one labeled crazy just because you refuse to protect the people who hurt you. It's a lonely place to be standing on the outside while everyone else applauds the liars. But I want you to know something. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes you just have to be the one to dig it up. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The ballroom floor was a minefield of silk trains and outstretched dress shoes, a treacherous landscape I had to navigate while walking, backward, knees bent, keeping the horizon line of my shot perfectly level. My headset chattered with the director's commands: pan, left push in, give me the senator's reaction. But the noise in the room was a living thing, a low roar of polite laughter and clinking silverware that vibrated in my chest. I moved like a ghost through the banquet tables, my body autopilot trained to avoid collisions, my mind entirely focused on the hunt. I was getting closer to the head table, closer to them. Marcus was laughing now, a deep, resonant sound that I remembered hearing echoing up the stairs of our old colonial house when he was charming guests. It was a laugh that promised safety, stability, and wealth. It was the laugh of a man who believed his own myth. Standing just behind his left shoulder, leaning in to whisper something into his ear, was a man I recognized from the dossiers I'd compiled over the last year. Arthur Penhaligon, the family lawyer. He was younger than the other men at the table, perhaps 32, but he wore his bespoke charcoal suit with the ease of a man who slept in it. He was sharp-angled and severe, with dark hair swept back and eyes that scanned the room with the predatory calculation of a shark circling a reef. He was the Dennis family's fixer, the man who buried their scandals and drafted their non-disclosure agreements. Seeing him this close made my skin prickle. He was the wall of iron and legality that had protected my parents for a decade. He whispered something to Marcus, gesturing slightly to a tablet in his hand, likely confirming that the donations were tracking ahead of schedule. Marcus patted Arthur's arm, a gesture of fatherly affection he had never once bestowed on me. "Camera 2, get in tight on Mrs. Dennis," the director ordered. "She's tearing up again. It's gold." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and moved in. I was less than 5 feet away from my mother now. The zoom lens was unnecessary at this range. I could see the fine lines of cosmetic surgery around her eyes, the heavy powder settling into the creases of her neck. I held the shot framing her profile as she gazed mournfully at the empty chair set for Chloe, a theatrical prop meant to symbolize her absence draped in white roses. Then she turned. For a heartbeat, the lens didn't separate us. Eleanor looked directly into the camera and, by extension, directly at me. Her eyes, a piercing, icy blue that I had inherited, narrowed. There was a pause, a microscopic stutter in her performance. Her gaze traveled over the camera rig, over my black production clothes, and settled on my face. I held my breath. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. Does she see me? Does she see the 15-year-old girl she threw away? For a terrifying second, I thought the game was over. I thought she would scream my name, point a manicured finger, and have security drag me out. But then, the recognition flickered and died, smothered by her own colossal arrogance. To Eleanor Dennis, her daughter was a failure, a vagrant, a mess. Her daughter couldn't possibly be this professional woman operating complex machinery at the society event of the year. The cognitive dissonance was too great. She didn't see a daughter. She saw a servant who was invading her personal space. "You," she hissed, her voice low enough that the nearby senator wouldn't hear, but sharp enough to cut. She waved a dismissive hand at my lens. "You are too close. Back away. You're ruining the aesthetic." The aesthetic, that was all that mattered. "Apologies, ma'am," I mumbled, keeping my voice flat and nondescript, stepping back into the shadows. The encounter left me shaking. I retreated toward the perimeter of the room, my hands trembling on the stabilizer grips. The rejection shouldn't have hurt. I wanted them to fail. I wanted them to suffer. But the casual cruelty of it reopened a wound I thought had scar tissue over it. It dragged me back to that night in November 14 years ago, 2 days after Chloe died. I had threatened to tell the coroner about the delay about the dinner party. I thought my parents would panic, maybe even apologize. Instead, they methodically packed my life into 3 hefty trash bags. I remembered the sound of the zipper on my winter coat, the only thing I was allowed to keep besides the bags. I remembered standing on the front porch, the freezing wind biting through my jeans. Marcus hadn't even looked at me. He just handed me a folded envelope with a bus ticket and the address of the program in Utah. "You're sick, Sophia," he had said, his voice void of emotion. "You're stressing the family. You're inventing stories because you're jealous of the attention your sister is getting, even in death. Don't come back until you're fixed." They closed the heavy oak door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. Clack. That sound had haunted my nightmares for a decade. It was the sound of being unmade. They stripped me of my home, my credibility, and my family in a single evening, all to protect their social standing. They labeled me mentally unstable to preemptively discredit anything I might say to the authorities. It worked. Who listens to a hysterical teenager when the parents are pillar of the community philanthropists? I shook my head, physically, forcing the memory back into its box. Not now, I told myself. Focus. I checked my watch. The memorial reel was scheduled in 6 minutes. I had to move. I circled the back of the ballroom, heading toward the tech booth. The corridor behind the donor tables was narrower, a transit zone for waiters carrying trays of empty glasses. As I turned the corner near the service entrance, the air grew cooler. And then I saw him. Arthur Penhaligon was walking toward me. He was moving briskly, eyes fixed on his phone, the tails of his suit jacket flapping slightly with his stride. There was no way to avoid him without looking suspicious. I kept my head down, angling the camera away from him, making myself small. Just a tech, I chanted internally. Just a tech. He didn't slow down. He didn't look up. We were on a collision course, passing shoulder to shoulder in the tight hallway. As he passed, time seemed to dilate. I felt the fabric of his sleeve brush against my arm. He didn't look at me, not even a glance. But as he drew parallel, his hand hanging by his side opened. A small silver object fell from his palm. It hit the carpet with a muffled thud right next to my boot. Arthur kept walking. He didn't break stride. He didn't check to see if he dropped anything. He vanished around the corner, back toward the ballroom, disappearing into the swell of applause that was erupting for my father's speech. I stopped. I looked down. It was a USB drive, brushed aluminum, heavy duty. I knew exactly what was on it. I also knew that if anyone had seen that handoff, if anyone checked the security cameras in this hallway, later, it would look like an accident. A clumsy lawyer dropping a file, a tech picking it up. Plausible deniability. That was Arthur's specialty. I scooped up the drive, palming it instantly, and slipped it into the hidden pocket of my cargo pants. The metal was warm from his hand. It was a strange feeling realizing that the shark, the man who had legally bullied me for years on my parents' behalf, was the architect of this moment. I didn't know his reasons yet, not fully, but I knew he hated them as much as I did. He was the inside man I never knew I had until he reached out to me 6 months ago using an encrypted chat app. We had never met in person until this second. I took a breath, centered myself, and pushed through the heavy curtains into the tech booth. The booth was a raised platform at the back of the room, shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the glow of 36 monitors. Gary, the projectionist, was sitting in a rolling chair, tapping his foot to the rhythm of the music. A half-eaten bagel on the desk next to the master control console. "Hey, Gary," I said, my voice projecting a calm professional urgency. I set my camera rig down on the floor with a heavy clunk, feigning exhaustion. He spun around, startled. "Whoa, Soph, you scared me. You good?" "I'm good, but the truck isn't," I lied smoothly. I pointed to the audio board on the far left of the console, the one furthest away from the video playback computer. "Director says he's getting a 60-cycle hum on Channel 4. He thinks it's the house feed. Can you patch into the monitor and verify he's screaming in my ear about it?" Gary groaned, rolling his eyes. "Seriously. The audio guys checked that 3 times. I know. Just humor him so he shuts up." I gave him a conspiratorial, tired smile. "Fine," Gary sighed. He rolled his chair all the way to the left, putting his back to the video terminal. He put on his headphones and started fiddling with the knobs, frowning in concentration. This was it. I moved to the main computer. My heart was thundering so loud I was sure Gary could hear it over his headphones. On the screen, the playlist for the evening was queued up. The next file was highlighted in blue, Angel Gala Memorial Final.move. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the cool metal of Arthur's drive. I plugged it into the open USB slot on the front of the tower. A window popped up instantly. Drive E detected. I opened the folder. There was one file inside. It had the exact same file name as the original, Angel Gala Memorial Final.move. Arthur was thorough. With a trembling hand, I dragged the original file from the playlist to the trash bin. Then I dragged the new file from the USB drive into the playlist, copying, 5 seconds remaining. I glanced at Gary. He was still frowning at the audio meter tapping the glass. I don't hear a hum, he muttered. 2 seconds. It might be intermittent, I said, my voice tight. Complete. I yanked the USB drive out and shoved it back into my pocket just as Gary spun his chair back around. Soph, tell the director he's crazy, Gary said, pulling off the headphones. Channel 4 is clean as a whistle. I'll tell him, I said, picking up my camera rig. The weight of it felt different now, lighter, or maybe I was just stronger. Thanks, Gary. You're a lifesaver. Yeah, he grumbled, turning back to the main screen. He looked at the playlist. He looked at the file queued up. He didn't notice a thing. Video rolls in 90 seconds. Copy that, I said, stepping back out into the cool air of the ballroom. I walked back toward the stage, my pulse settling into a cold, hard rhythm. The trap was set. The bait was taken. All that was left was for my parents to pull the trigger on themselves. The house lights dipped, submerging the ballroom in a hushed, reverent twilight. The only illumination came from the twin spotlights crisscrossing the stage, pinning Marcus and Eleanor in a halo of white brilliance. It was the golden minute, the carefully choreographed climax of the evening, where the emotional pitch was feverish enough to loosen the purse strings of the city's elite. I adjusted the ISO on my camera, compensating for the darkness, ensuring the grain didn't obscure the triumph on my father's face. He looked like a king addressing his court, magnanimous and untouchable. Friends, colleagues, visionaries. Marcus began, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that required the audience to lean in. We have spoken tonight about loss, but we must also speak about the future. Chloe's life was cut short by a tragedy. We couldn't predict a silent killer that stole her in the night, but her spirit, that didn't die. It lives in this foundation. It lives in every check you write tonight. He paused, allowing the silence to do the heavy lifting. Beside him, Eleanor dabbed her eyes again, though I noticed, through my zoom lens, that her makeup remained miraculously unsmudged. She stepped toward the microphone, placing a manicured hand on Marcus's arm. We have a goal tonight, she said, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. $20 million. That is the cost of the new pediatric wing we wish to build in Chloe's name, a place where no child will ever feel alone in the dark. To show you why this matters, we found something special, a recovered home movie digitally restored showing our beautiful girl, in her element, full of the joy we all miss so dearly. She gestured grandly to the massive projection screen that dominated the back wall of the stage. It was a canvas 20 feet high, currently black, waiting to be filled with the lie. Please, Marcus said, raising his glass. Watch, remember, and give. In the tech booth, I knew Gary was hitting the space bar. My heart stopped. The world narrowed down to the viewfinder of my camera and the giant screen in the background. I wasn't breathing. I wasn't blinking. I was a statue made of nerves and adrenaline. The screen flickered to life, but there was no swelling orchestral music. There were no soft focus shots of Chloe running through a meadow or blowing out birthday candles. There was no Angel Foundation logo spinning in gold. Instead, the audio system cracked with a harsh, high-pitched hiss, the distinct static of an old camcorder microphone being adjusted. The image that filled the 20-foot screen was grainy, low resolution and shaking. It was a close-up, the angle distorted as if the camera had been set on a shelf or a stack of books. The lighting was poor, the sickly yellow cast of a bedside lamp. A collective murmur rippled through the ballroom. This wasn't the polished aesthetic the donors were used to. It looked ugly. It looked wrong. Then Chloe moved into the frame. A gasp, sharp and involuntary, sucked the air out of the room. It wasn't the Chloe from the brochures. This wasn't the smiling, vibrant girl the foundation used on their letterhead. This was Chloe 2 hours before she died. She was sitting on the floor of her bedroom, her back against the doorframe. Her skin was the color of wet ash, slick with a fever sweat that plastered her blonde hair to her forehead in jagged strips. She was wearing her favorite oversized flannel pajama shirt, the one with the blue plaid, but her hands were clutching her abdomen so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked small. She looked terrified. On stage, Eleanor froze. Her hand went to her throat, not in performance, but in genuine paralytic shock. Marcus took a half step back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. They were too stunned to react, too confused to understand how their sanitized history had been replaced by this raw, ugly reality. The audio boomed through the ballroom's $1,000,000 speakers, amplifying Chloe's ragged breathing. It sounded like a rasping saw. It's 200 a.m., Chloe's voice said. It was thin, reedy, broken by a whimper of pain that tore through the silence of the gala like a gunshot. She looked directly into the lens of the camcorder she must have hidden on her bookshelf. My stomach. It feels like it's on fire. It won't stop. The crowd was dead silent now. No one was drinking. No one was eating. 300 people were paralyzed, witnessing a ghost speak. I knocked, Chloe whispered, tears cutting tracks through the sweat on her face. I knocked on the door for an hour. Mom and Dad? They locked it from the outside. They said I was being dramatic. On stage, Marcus lunged toward the tech booth, waving his arms frantically. Cut it, he screamed, his voice cracking. Cut the feed. Technical difficulty. Cut it now. But Gary in the booth was likely staring at the screen in horror, or perhaps the file was locked. The video played on, relentless. They have the senator downstairs. Chloe continued, her voice gaining a sudden lucid intensity that was terrifying to behold. She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes huge and dark, filling the 20-foot screen behind her parents. I heard Dad say it. He said the ambulance sirens would look low class. He said it would ruin the dinner. A woman in the front row dropped her champagne flute. The glass shattered on the parquet floor, the sound exploding like a bomb in the quiet. But no one looked at her. If I die tonight, Chloe said, her voice steadying with a chilling finality, it's not because I was sick. It's because Mom and Dad refused to take me to the hospital to save their reputation. They chose the senator over me. The video cut to black. For 3 seconds, the silence was absolute. It was a vacuum, heavy and suffocating. Then the sound returned. It started as a low rumble, the sound of 300 people realizing they had been complicit in a lie. Then the distinct ping, ping, ping of notifications began. I kept my camera rolling. I didn't look away. I framed the shot perfectly, Marcus and Eleanor small, and exposed beneath the blank black screen, illuminated by the harsh spotlight, facing a sea of people who suddenly looked at them with revulsion. A man in the third row, the CEO of a major banking firm, stood up. He pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. Cancel the transfer, he said loudly, his voice carrying in the acoustically perfect room. Now, and get the legal team on the line. It was the domino falling. All around the room, screens lit up. People were frantically tapping, canceling pledges, texting their PR teams to distance themselves. The golden minute had turned into a mass exodus of capital. Marcus was panicking. The statesman mask had completely disintegrated. He looked wild, his eyes darting around the room looking for a lifeline, looking for someone to blame. He grabbed the microphone stand, the feedback screeching. "This is a deep fake," he yelled, sweating profusely. "This is AI. This is a malicious attack by our enemies. That video is not real. Security, where is security?" He turned desperately to the side of the stage, locking eyes with the one person he thought could save him. "Arthur," Marcus screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the lawyer. "Arthur, do something, fix this. Tell them it's a fabrication. Get up here." Arthur Penhaligon stepped out of the shadows. He didn't rush. He didn't look panicked. He walked up the stairs to the stage with a calm, deliberate gait, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked like the picture of professional competence. Marcus grabbed Arthur's shoulder, practically shaking him. "Tell them." Arthur threatened them with libel suits. "Shut this down." Arthur gently but firmly removed Marcus's hand from his shoulder. He stepped past my father, approaching the microphone. He adjusted the height. He looked out at the crowd, then looked directly into the lens of the live broadcast camera. My camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice cool and level, "Mr. Dennis is asking me to defend him. He is asking me to tell you that the video you just saw is a fabrication." He paused. He looked back at Marcus, and for the first time, the mask of the loyal servant dropped. A smile, cold and razor-sharp, touched his lips. "I cannot do that," Arthur said, turning back to the audience, "because I am the one who preserved that tape." Eleanor let out a strangled gasp. "What, 14 years ago?" Arthur continued, his voice echoing through the ruined gala. "I was a scholarship student at the local prep school. I wasn't a lawyer then. I was just a boy, and Chloe Dennis was my girlfriend." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Eleanor staggered back, clutching the podium for support. Marcus looked at Arthur as if he were seeing an alien. "We kept it secret," Arthur said, his eyes hard, "because I wasn't high class enough for this family. The night she died, she called me. She told me she was scared. She told me her parents had locked her in. I rode my bike to your house, Marcus. I banged on your front door at 3 a.m. Do you remember?" Marcus went pale. He remembered. I could see it in his eyes. He had dismissed the banging as a neighborhood prank or a drunk. "I found the camcorder when I broke into her room the next day before you had the cleaners scrub the place," Arthur said. "I kept it. I watched it every day for 10 years. I went to law school for one reason, not to get rich, not to become a partner." He turned to face Marcus and Eleanor fully. "I became a lawyer so I could work for you, so I could get close enough to ensure that when this moment came, there would be no escape. I drafted your contracts, I organized your finances, and I made sure every single piece of evidence regarding the fraud of this foundation was meticulously documented and delivered to the district attorney's office this morning." Marcus lunged at him. "You traitor, you little rat!" Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't have to. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said into the mic, his voice final, "if you look to the rear of the ballroom, you will see that the guests of honor are leaving." The heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open. 6 uniformed police officers and 2 detectives in the plain clothes marched in. They weren't there for security. They were moving with purpose, handcuffs already unclipped from their belts. I zoomed in on my parents' faces. It was the shot of a lifetime. The terror, the realization, the absolute crushing end of their world. I held the frame steady, capturing every second of their destruction as the officers ascended the stairs. The YouTube safe guidelines prohibited gore, but this was a different kind of violence. It was the surgical removal of a cancer. It was the death of an ego. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever filmed. The illusion of the gala didn't just break. It shattered, raining down around us like the jagged shards of the crystal chandeliers overhead. The silence that had followed the video was replaced by a cacophony of panicked whispers, scraping chairs, and the hurried footsteps of 300 wealthy socialites trying to distance themselves from a crime scene. I stood near the tech booth, my camera finally lowered to my hip, watching the empire my parents had built on my sister's bones turn to dust in real time. On stage, Eleanor wasn't looking at the police officers marching down the center aisle. She was looking for a scapegoat. Her eyes were wild, darting frantically from Arthur, who stood like a marble statue of judgment, to the projection booth. She needed someone to blame, someone to hurt, because hurting people was the only way she knew how to regain control. "Who did this?" she shrieked, her voice shredding the remaining dignity of the event. She pointed a trembling finger at the tech booth. Her face twisted into a mask of feral rage that I knew intimately. "Sabotage. I want the person in that booth arrested. This is slander." Gary, the projectionist, was cowering behind his monitors, hands raised in surrender. But Eleanor wasn't looking at him. Her gaze swept past the glass and locked onto me. I was standing in the open now, having stepped out from behind the curtain. I reached up and pulled off my black production cap, letting my hair fall loose. I removed the bulky headset and let it hang around my neck. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked toward the stage. Eleanor froze. The chaotic noise of the room seemed to fade into a dull roar as she squinted against the glare of the spotlights. She stumbled down the stairs, ignoring the approaching officers, driven by a maternal instinct that had curdled into hatred. She stopped 3 feet from me. For a moment, she just stared. She looked at the scar on my chin, the one I got when I was 12, and fell off my bike, and she had scolded me for ruining my dress. She looked at my eyes, the same shade of blue as hers. "Sophia," she whispered. The name sounded foreign in her mouth, like a word she hadn't spoken in a decade. Then the shock evaporated, replaced instantly by the venom that had poisoned my childhood. Her face contorted. "You," she hissed, stepping into my personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "You ungrateful, spiteful little brat. You did this. You ruined this night. Do you have any idea how much money we were raising? Do you have any idea what you've done?" She raised her hand to slap me. It was a reflex, a muscle memory from a time when I was small and helpless. But I wasn't 15 anymore. I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I simply looked at her, and the sheer weight of my indifference stopped her hand in midair. "I know exactly what I've done, Mother," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and amplified by the boom mic that a stunned audio operator was still holding overhead. The sound of my voice echoed through the ballroom, causing the fleeing donors to pause and look back. "I just finished the documentary you hired me to film." "Security!" Eleanor screamed, spinning around to face the room. "Remove her. She's mentally unstable. She's off her medication. Don't listen to her. They aren't listening to you anymore. Eleanor, I said, stepping closer, the script is gone. There is no senator coming to dinner. There is no saintly hero narrative to hide behind. There is just you and the choice you made. We did everything for you, Marcus bellowed, rushing down the stairs to join his wife. He was sweating through his tuxedo, his face a mottled red. We gave you a home, we gave you the best schools, and this is how you repay us, by destroying your sister's legacy. I didn't destroy her legacy, I said, feeling a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in 14 years. I just told her truth. You were the ones who buried it. The confrontation was cut short by the arrival of the authorities. The detectives, two men in cheap suits that contrasted sharply with the tuxedo-clad crowd, stepped between us. Marcus Dennis, Eleanor Dennis, the lead detective asked, flashing a badge that caught the light. I'm Detective Miller. You're both under arrest for charity fraud, obstruction of justice, and negligent homicide. This is ridiculous, Marcus sputtered, puffing out his chest in a futile attempt to intimidate the law. Do you know who I am? I am a personal friend of the mayor. I demand you call him immediately. You can make your phone call from the station, sir, Miller said, his voice unimpressed. He reached for his belt. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was distinct. Click, click, click. It was a dry, mechanical sound devoid of drama, but it hit the room like a thunderclap. The reaction from the high society guests was instantaneous and brutal. These were people whose loyalty was entirely conditional on success. The moment the cuffs went on, my parents ceased to be peers. They became pariahs. I watched as the room emptied. The exodus was chaotic. Women in ball gowns were tripping over their hems to get to the exits, clutching their clutches tight as if fear was contagious. Men were on their phones barking orders to their PR firms to scrub any mention of the Angel Foundation from their websites. The tables laden with half-eaten filet mignon and untouched desserts looked like the ruins of a fallen kingdom. The waitstaff stood against the walls, watching with wide eyes, witnessing the redistribution of karma. Marcus and Eleanor were being led away. Marcus was still shouting, threatening lawsuits, threatening to have the officers' badges flailing against the grip of the detective. But Eleanor went quiet. As they dragged her past me, she looked up. Her hair was disheveled. Her diamonds looked like costume jewelry and her eyes were empty. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a giant. I didn't see a monster. I saw a small, vain, terrified woman who had traded her soul for a dinner party and lost both. Arthur Penhaligon stood by the stage watching them go. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just buttoned his jacket and gave a small, respectful nod in my direction. We didn't need to speak. The work was done. Wait! Marcus screamed as they reached the double doors. He twisted around, looking back at the empty ballroom, at the overturned chairs, at the ruin of his life. He looked at me. Sophia, fix this. Tell them it's a mistake. We're your family. I looked at him through the viewfinder of my mind, framing the shot one last time. My family is in the ground, Dad, I said, quietly, though he couldn't hear me over the commotion. And I'm finally going to go say goodbye to her. The doors swung shut behind them, cutting off his shouts. The ballroom was suddenly quiet, save for the hum of the cooling fans in the tech booth, and the distant wail of sirens approaching from the street sirens that were 14 years too late, but welcome nonetheless. I stood alone in the center of the empty floor. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But beneath that, there was something else, a clean, quiet sense of peace. I had spent half my life running from their shadow, terrified that they were right, that I was the broken one, the crazy one. But standing there watching the dust motes dance in the spotlight where they used to stand, I realized the truth. I wasn't broken. I was just the only one who remembered. If you've ever had to stand alone against the people who were supposed to protect you, you know that the hardest part isn't the fight itself, it's the moment after, when the noise stops and you have to decide who you are without the conflict. It's a heavy feeling, but it's the feeling of freedom. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The morning after the gala, the sun rose over the city with a clarity that felt almost insulting to the chaos unfolding on the screens below. The fallout wasn't a ripple, it was a tsunami. By the time I woke up in my hotel room, the clip of Chloe's video diary had been viewed 40 million times. The internet, usually a cacophony of conflicting opinions, was united in a singular roaring fury. The Angel Foundation website had crashed within minutes of the broadcast, but not before hackers had defaced the homepage with a single looping GIF of Marcus pushing a donor's hand while his daughter screamed in the background. In the weeks that followed, the dismantling of the Dennis empire was surgical and total. It was fascinating to watch in a detached, clinical sort of way. The speed with which their friends turned on them was breathtaking. The same senators and CEOs who had sipped champagne with Marcus at the gala were now holding press conferences, claiming they had always suspected something was off, painting themselves as victims of my parents' deception. The lawsuits started piling up on Monday morning. The donors wanted their money back. The IRS wanted to audit the last 10 years of the foundation's administrative expenses. The district attorney, sensing a career-making case, denied bail, citing the significant offshore accounts Arthur had helpfully flagged as a flight risk. Marcus and Eleanor were trading their bespoke tuxedos and silk gowns for county-issued orange jumpsuits. I saw a clip of them being arraigned on the news. Marcus looked small, shrunken without the padding of his ego. Eleanor looked confused, looking around the courtroom for an assistant to yell at, only to find a public defender who looked overworked and unimpressed. They were bankrupt. Their assets were frozen, their mansion seized, and their reputation, the only god they ever worshipped, was incinerated. They would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. But even if they got out, they were finished. They were irrelevant. That was the true punishment. 2 weeks after the gala, I met Arthur at a small coffee shop on the edge of the city, far away from the courthouses and the cameras. He looked different. The sharp shark-like suit was gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. He looked younger, lighter. "The plea deal is off the table," he said, blowing steam off his cup. "The DA wants a trial. She wants to make an example of them. Fraud, negligence, witness, intimidation. They're looking at 20 years minimum." "Good," I said. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, but all I felt was a quiet, settling peace. The war was over. The soldiers could go home. "I found this in the files," Arthur said, sliding a small manila envelope across the table. "It's the deed to the lake house, the one Chloe loved. They put it in a shell company years ago to hide assets. Since I was the administrator of that shell, well, let's just say it fell through the cracks of the seizure order. It's in your name now." I looked at the envelope. The lake house. The only place where we had ever been happy, away from the dinner parties and the expectations. You planned this for a decade, I said, looking at him. You gave up your 20s to work for monsters. Arthur smiled, a sad, crooked expression. I promised her, Sophia, that night, before the phone cut out, I promised her I wouldn't let them get away with it. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to be inside to tear it down. We finished our coffee in silence, the kind of comfortable silence shared by two people who have survived the same shipwreck. Afterward, we drove to the cemetery. We didn't go to the massive weeping angel monument my parents had erected in the center of the prestige section of the cemetery. That was just another billboard for their vanity. Instead, we walked to the edge of the grounds near the tree line where the grass was overgrown and the noise of the city was muffled by the oaks. There was no stone here, just a small patch of earth where Arthur had planted hydrangeas years ago, her favorite. We stood there for a long time. I didn't say anything to the ground. I didn't need to. Chloe wasn't in the dirt. She was free. She was in the wind rustling the leaves, and for the first time in 14 years, she was vindicated. The truth was out. The lie was dead. What will you do now? Arthur asked, hands in his pockets. I don't know, I admitted. I've spent so long being the lens watching them planning this. I think I might just drive. Go see the ocean. Film something beautiful for a change. Something real. Sounds like a plan, he said. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder, a brief grounding touch. You're free, Sophia. Don't look back. I walked back to my car, a battered SUV loaded with my camera gear. I threw the last bag in the back seat. For years, that camera had been a weapon, a shield, a way to distance myself from the pain. Now it was just a tool. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine hummed to life. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the looming shadow of my parents or the ghost of the girl I used to be. But there was nothing there, just the road behind me, stretching out into the distance, and the open highway ahead. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't turn on the radio. I just rolled down the windows and let the air rush in, smelling of rain and asphalt and possibilities. I was 29 years old, and my life was finally truly beginning. It's strange how heavy the past can feel until the moment you decide to put it down. We spend so much time carrying the baggage of what people did to us, thinking it defines who we are. But it doesn't. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about liberating the innocent so they can finally breathe again. If you've ever felt weighed down by a history you didn't choose, I hope you find your own way to the open road. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. Sophia's journey proves that while the truth can be buried, it never stays dead forever. Have you ever had to stand up to family to protect what was right or felt silenced by those who should have protected you? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Revenge. We'll see you next time.